This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is April the 27th, 2023. I am in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and I have the pleasure to sit down through Zoom with James Bryant. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
No problem.
And can you tell us where you're at right now?
I'm in San Diego, California, on Point Loma, looking over the bay, but it's now very dense fog. I always hated that when I was navigator or command of a submarine here when the fog came in.
And where were you born at, James?
I was born in Pasadena, California.
And do you have any military veterans in your family?
Yes, my father was a fighter pilot in World War II, two Distinguished Flying Cross. His father was a cavalry officer in World War I in New Mexico, and I have his 1911 45 was issued to him, along with his World War I victory medal and his Southern service for serving down in the area. And my mother's father was an ambulance driver in World War I. And he said that if he hadn't built for World War I, he'd still be taking freshman English at Stanford University. He didn't have a good time with English course there.
So you have an extensive military history in your family. Was that part of your motivation to be commissioned in the Navy?
Well, my father owned a large car dealership, and it was a pretty affluent family, and they wanted me to go to University in Southern California, where my mother went, and they wanted me to go take over the car business. And I says, no, I'm going to reject that. That's all too easy. So I said, I'm going to go to the Naval Academy in the summer of love, 1967, where they were playing, if you want, wear flowers in your hair if you want to come to San Francisco. And I went to the Naval Academy and got my butt kicked.
Did you find it hard to get accepted into the Naval Academy, or?
And the only reason why I got in is because it was at the height of the Vietnam War, and the really talented people did not want to go. And so I never would have made it today. Because I was the first alternate. So the primary guy to go from my congressman didn't want to go. He bailed out, and so I got the opportunity to go.
Do you have any recollections of your first day in Annapolis?
Yes, it was very hot and sweaty, and they told us to look at the man at the left of you, look at the man on the right of you, and one of those guys will be gone by the time you graduate. And that's about right. My class of 71 started out with about 1,300 people, and we graduated about 800. So, it's close to half of the class, initial starters. They don't do that anymore. They keep people. They lose very few, but that was the way it was in the 60s.
Did you enjoy your time there?
The first 2 years were prison camp. It was very difficult. I did not get along very well with the upperclassmen. I got tortured all the way through, June week, the end of my plebe year. And in my second year there, I didn't understand how to get away with things and do things. The last 2 years were pretty good because I figured out what rules you could break and how to break them and not get caught, not get in trouble.
It took you 2 years to figure those out, though, right?
Yeah, it took me 2 years, but that helped me a lot in my career, figuring out what rules you can break and what rules you can't break.
Yeah.
You don't break rules with a reactor plant, but you can break tactical rules are pretty good. You can do that.
Mm-hmm. Army Navy game. You have any recollections of going to those games?
Oh yeah, I was my plebe year. I was what they call lower than the oh crap the ocean. I got and the deck, the hallmate to so, but it was a good game. We won that game. We won 2 games in my 4 years there. The plebe year, which means we got to carry on through Christmas, and we didn't have to brace up. We didn't have to chop the halls, run in the halls. And that was pretty good. And then we also won my first class year.
Mm-hmm. Jim, administratively, we just ran into a slow part of the video through it was buffering. If we get kicked off this interview, try to log back on and I'll meet you in a couple of minutes. I'll have to download part of the video we already did.
Okay.
We're fine right now, but sometimes it'll drop off. Okay, so you went to the Naval Academy, and then when you get out at that point, you're a commissioned officer in the Navy.
Yes.
Did you have a specialty at that point, or they send you to
Well,
additional
yes,
training?
I want you do things during the summer. You know, the first summer was on a destroyer, acting as a seaman, and then the second summer you run around and you spend a week with the aviators, and you spend a week with the Marines, and you spend that kind of stuff. And the third summer, I was offered to go on a cruise, midshipman, first class midshipman cruise on a fleet ballistic missile submarine. And this turned to be a 78-day mission, patrol up the North Atlantic, up into almost to the Bering Sea. And I really thought that was important. It became very clear to me that submarines were the tip of the spear, that they were, if something ever happened between us and the Soviet Union, that it was going to be the submarines were the one that were going to carry the day.
Yeah.
So I applied for the nuclear power program, and I got an interview by the famous Admiral Hyman Rickover. Had been the director of the Navy nuclear repulsion program since about 48, and he interviewed all officer candidates. And so I got my interview with him, but he was very nice to me. Because my grades had improved, my class standing had improved every semester, where other guys would sort of tail off. And so he smiled at me and told me I was in the program, just signed to study how many hours a week, and then write him a letter every month how many hours I studied, and it was all fine. They threw me in the closet, which they do.
Mm-hmm.
Get in the closet and think about, well, hey guy, I mean, I just talked to Rick over. He said I was in the program. Why am I going in the closet?
So what type of training beyond the Naval Academy do you have to go through when you're assigned to a ship like that?
Well, I was tired of going to school, so I went to a reserve destroyer escort for 6 months before I went to nuclear power school. That was a lot of fun, but you basically have a 6 months classroom course, which is very rigorous. And even if you have, a master's in electrical engineering, it's still challenging to you. I had to study very hard. I flunked every math test except for the last one and managed to pass.
That's the important one.
And then absolutely. And then we went to a prototype reactor out in the desert in Idaho. So you had to train on a reactor and qualify an engineering officer to watch on that reactor plant. And it was S5G. It looked just like the propulsion plant of the USS Narwhal. Natural circulation. It was in a basin that could be floated, so you could move it around. So you started out in engine room lower level, qualifying down there, turning the valves and operating the pumps and that kind of thing. So out of that, you got an AAC license essentially to operate a nuclear reactor.
So what year would this have been?
The winter of 71, 72 was nuclear power school, and then the summer of 72 was at the prototype reactor in Idaho, and then I ended up at we had a 3 month or 2 month submarine school course in London, and then I reported to my first submarine, Sea Dragon, in Hawaii. It was in March of 73.
I'm sorry, the name of that ship again was Sea Dragon?
Sea Dragon.
Okay, so let's back up just a little bit. This video may be watched by some young American who doesn't have a good grasp of what the Cold War was all about. This was during as Vietnam was starting to wind down a little bit, or at least toward the ends of the end of the conflict. Tell us in general what America's posture was in the world, and how and the importance of nuclear power at sea during this time.
Well, a nuclear power changed the submarine from a torpedo boat that could submerge for short periods of time, or when it got more advanced, used their batteries and they could go really fast for about 2 hours and they stopped because they had to come to the near surface and raise the mast or surface to get the air to run their diesel engines to charge the batteries. In World War II, a submarine could go 9 knots, 9 nautical miles per hour for an hour, and it was out of gas. It had a surface. And they increased the batteries in the 50s of diesel electric submarines so they could go a couple hours really fast. But they were still, their endurance and their ultimate speed was very limited. So we went from 9 knots for an hour until the Thresher class was developed in the early 60s. You could do 28 knots forever and stay submerged forever and not have to go up and charge batteries. So nuclear power was very important. And the big thing is that Russians got behind on this. We had the Nautilus went to sea in, I think, 54. And the Russians didn't put out a nuclear submarine till like 58. Remember, they launched the Sputnik, and the Sputnik scared everybody because it used an intercontinental ballistic missile to put that basically just a radio transmitter beeping. It wasn't anything super scientific or anything. It was just a transmitter it was a propaganda device. That scared us a lot. And they kept saying that we're stronger, we have more nuclear weapons than you guys do, and we have more lift. And it really wasn't true because Eisenhower had the U-2 spy plane. We could overfly and we could see that their stuff was not as good as ours, but because it was a U-2, no one could talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so when Eisenhower finished his term, he had to go through, the Kennedy-Nixon debate, and they were all talking about beefing up the weapon system. That helped the submarine force a lot because we put missiles on submarines, the Fleet Ballistic Missile submarine.
Now, if a submarine is nuclear powered, does that necessarily mean it has nuclear weapons or not?
Well, we all had nuclear weapons up until the very end of the 80s, early 90s. My first submarine, Sea Dragon. Sea Dragon was a Tang class, designed as a Tang class diesel electric submarine based on the design of the German Type 21 in World War II, which was their electric boot. It could raise a mast, could take air in and run its diesel submerged. But so they designed it just like that because it was being built the same time Nautilus was being built. They didn't really have the experience. Well, I was 2 years weapons officer, and I had two nuclear tipped torpedoes called Aster torpedoes, Mark 45s. We also had a ballistic missile called submarine rocket that could be shot through the torpedo tubes, go to the surface, and then launch a rocket that carried a nuclear depth charge on it. And that was a pretty significant size nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. And so when I finally got back to fast attacks in 80, the next three Thresher class submarines had the subrock on them.
Gotcha.
I offloaded that in 90. At the end of 90, when we got rid of nuclear weapons on most of the submarines.
So on the Sea Dragon, that's your first assignment. Are you an 01 at this point?
I was it was the Vietnam War and there's accelerated promotions. I was a 02, Lieutenant Junior.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that submarine and what the living conditions were? Are you sharing a room with another officer? What's the approximate crew on this submarine?
The crew was about again, it was like a diesel electric submarine with a reactor compartment stuck in a steam plant engine room. Uh, Conditions were very tight. There's actually a movie one of the authors made of the staterooms, the center stateroom. Of You have three bunks in there with about enough space as a telephone booth, so you can't all change at once. So if somebody has to get out of the bunk, you got to get out of your chair. And there was like two desks in there, full down desk, small desk, but you had three guys living in there, officers living in there. The crew, we hot bunked about almost half the crew. That meant you had uh, three sailors, junior sailors, assigned to two bunks. So someone was always on watch, so it wasn't a problem. Now, when I got around from me being the executive officer and in command, we encouraged the guys to get those. You get down to the kids' sleepover sleeping bags that are nice and comfy. They get Mickey Mouse or Cinderella on them or whatever, and they could roll those, and the mattress were covered with a naga hide cover, so they'd roll out their little sleeping bag, pull their pillow out, sleep. When they were finished, they'd roll it back up at the end of the bed. The next guy would come down and roll out his with his pillow, and that worked pretty good because you could launder those things. They were cloth, fuzzy cloth, and you could launder those things,
Yeah.
and that made it reasonably comfortable for the guys having and they're most of the junior guys.
Hmm. So how long was your service on the Sea Dragon?
It was 3 years. Also, talk about we get to walk on our food.
Yeah,
We
what
try
you
to
said that
slow
what
down.
what does that mean?
Okay, in the passageways, the narrow passageways in the berthing compartment, you took number 10 cans, and you had two levels of number 10 cans of boiled potatoes, asparagus, all the things that come in big cans when you're feeding a crew. And they put wooden blocks on it at the end of the passageway so the cans wouldn't move. So if you lived in the lower bunk, you'd have to remove a couple of cans in order to slip down into the bunk, and then you put those cans up. Well, some of the guys kind of liked that because it made them a nice little cubby hole, and it was all dark and cool, and it was good. And then you had cans of coffee, sugar, flour. These were 10-gallon cans, and they were strapped along various passageways, sometimes in the engine room. And so there just wasn't enough storage, and you had two refrigeration. One was a freeze box, and one was a chill box. Chill box, obviously, where you put your milk and your fresh vegetables in. But when you went on a mission against the Soviets, it became two freeze boxes. Your last ration of fresh milk went into the milk machine on your way out the harbor, and you had no fresh vegetables.
So what was the food situation like?
Well, we ate very very well. I mean, we got an extra one-third ration per man per day, and the officers ate out of the crew's mess. So we had steak and lobster once a month.
Hmm.
Um, just you got tired of three bean salad. But what I did on my submarine when I had command is I authorized cream soups, and that wasn't in the Navy. This was not in the Navy menu manual, and I went, well, hell with it. We had an electric steam kettle that we could make these big soups, and we had lots of powdered milk, and we had frozen vegetables. So we'd make cream of broccoli soup and throw some cheese on it, and the crew liked that. And that was better getting their greens rather than making three bean salads. And everybody
Yeah.
got tired of three bean salads quick.
So on the Sea Dragon, how long typically would you be underwater?
Uh, Usually about a 60-day,
Oh wow.
65 days. Uh, my longest time at sea was 78 days on the Abraham Lincoln as a first class midshipman, as I mentioned earlier. That cruise was extended and I ended up getting back and barely got about 8 days at home before I had to go back to the Naval Academy. Other fun things with foods, we carried a lot of powdered eggs, and we carried uh, canned bacon, army canned bacon, green cans. And well, he carried lots of jalapenos. And I asked him, why the jalapenos? Well, you'll find out. If you take the plastic eggs, the powdered eggs, and you mix in the jalapeno peppers and the canned bacon, it comes out to be pretty good. It's pretty tasty.
Um, the latrines or the head. So you guys able to get showers? I mean, how does that work on a submarine?
We had showers. We had a big evaporator. Everybody knows about the reverse osmosis. Didn't have that. And you had to run steam through and boil the seawater under a vacuum, and then you condensed it and ran it through an ionizer, and that was for either the reactor plant or for your potable water. So you could take showers. Uh, my routine was take a shower once every three days, just because it was busy and to conserve water.
Well,
And the showers and the toilets all drained what they call a sanitary tank. And that tank had to be blown to sea. It had to be blown to sea, usually at 150 feet or above 200 feet. And then you had to vent it back inboard. And of course, that was not a delightful smell. Even though they had charcoal filters on it, it was, venting sanitaries inboard was not good. And what you did not want to do was open your flapper valve, because there's a ball valve in the bottom of the toilet. And you did not want to open that valve when that tank was pressurized, because you got a brown shower. It became very unpleasant, and you would be the source of ridicule. So
did that happen from time to time?
it happened from time to time. Yes.
Terrible. Um, so I've heard stories. I'm not a Navy guy, but I've heard stories about when you pass a certain geographical location in the Navy, they have a some kind of a ceremony. Help me out with this. What is that? The King Neptune or something like that?
Well, I'm a blue nose, a member of the realm of the Golden Dragon, and I'm what do they call it? Crossing the equator. Not a polywog. I'm a shellback.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
What?
blue nose is crossing the Arctic Circle. I got that on the uh, Abraham Lincoln summer of '70 as a midshipman. And they said, well, you have to go hide so they won't get you. But what they were really doing was putting us in storage so they could bring us out one at a time and torture us. So you got, your nose painted blue, you got lard in your ears, and then you had to crawl up and take the maraschino cherry out of the belly of the royal bear, which was the fattest bellied guy on board. And while he rubbed lard in your hair, well, while Polaris Rex watched over you, that was good fun. Then I crossed the equator on the permit going to the Indian Ocean on the first Iranian dust up in the summer of '80. And I was navigator. I was third officer, but I was a polywog. And so I'd taken along with me a squirt gun, and I had that carefully hidden in my sock. So we're going through cruise mess, getting abused by stuff being thrown on it. And someone says, Navigator's got a water gun. So I rolled over, nailed the CO, who was King Neptune, 3 times in the face before my world became lard. Lard in my ears, lard in my eyes. They took my squirt gun away from me.
That's good stuff. You guys get like a certificate or something like that too,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
You still have that?
Yes.
That's great. So tell me about whether it's the Sea Dragon or other ships that you've been on or submarines. Tell me about what um, I know there's probably not a lot of downtime, but in the little amount of downtime that the sailors have, what is it that they have to do? So they have movies they can
They
watch.
showed
What?
movies. Yeah, every night the Midwatch showed a movie. Kind of a movie after cruise mess. Of course, back in the old days, there were these big cases, big, boxes with wheels in them, and you had a movie projector.
Hmm.
Card games, on Sea Dragon, the captain allowed a card game, a poker game, in the chief's quarters, and he watched the books very carefully to see who was winning and who was not winning and that kind of stuff. I didn't allow that. I just was too hard. By the time I took command in the late '80s, that was kind of forbidden. He also kept a couple of bottles of whiskey under his bunk. For example, when we surfaced in the Bering Sea on Sea Dragon in March, April of '73, he went. He had a big bug juice machine, Kool-Aid machine, cruise mess. So he just poured a fifth of whiskey into the bug juice machine, stationed the chief there to make sure that everyone only got one cup, and it was all good. I mean, you couldn't even get a buzz on that because it was real mixed, but that was a great morale enhancer.
Yeah, I bet. Um, were you married at the time on your for the with the Sea Dragon, or was that later in life?
Yes, yes. I got married right after I completed nuclear power training and was on my way to submarine school.
So I'm going to make an assumption there's little to no communication between the sailors on board a submarine and their family back home. Is that accurate?
You know what? I guess today they have emails. They have emails and stuff. Uh, I don't know. We had what they call a familygram, and you got so many letters. It was like basically about 15 or 20 words, and they would send it via the regular submarine broadcast. And then, when they had time on the broadcast, and each family got so many of these familygrams, they would write things in and then send it to the squadron. And the squadron would look at to make sure it was censored, to make sure there weren't any cute ways of talking about sexual terms and stuff. But you'd get that on a long mission against the Soviets.
Mm-hmm. So, what type of missions are you running, and what's the day-to-day operation of a ship during the Cold War? I assume we had ships all over the place, Atlantic, Pacific.
Yeah, well, the Soviets had several major ports. Up in the Barents Sea, they had a couple of major bases, and they had Vladivostok in the Sea of Japan and Petropavlovsk up Comanche. I don't pronounce things well. The peninsula up there, uh, in the Bering Sea. And so, if you there's my submarine I commanded was Guardfish, and they declassified a mission that Guardfish did in about the '72 timeframe, and that it says in the declassified version that Guardfish was sitting 12 miles off the coast of Vladivostok, and it heard these submarines go by, and they were missile firing submarines, and then four of them went by submerged where they normally come out surface, and he followed them down, and that allowed Nixon to get the red phone and say, "What are you guys doing? If you guys approach our aircraft carriers of Vietnam, we're going to sink your submarines." And that involved some interesting discussions, and finally went. But so, if you'd assume, and other books have been written about guys being in the Barents Sea, because in World War II, we we thought submarines were really going to help us. Admiral Hart in the Philippines had 23 submarines. He thought he was going to stop the Japanese dead cold, but torpedoes didn't work. But one of the missions was to actually put U.S. submarines off the Japanese coast before the war started. We didn't do that because the political will was not there to do that. So we said, well, that'd be a really good idea doing that in the Cold War, is to forward deploy these submarines to be around the enemy to see what they're doing, and then if war were to come, all I got to do is shoot weapons. So you did a lot of missions like that, as well as exercise with the Navy.
Mm-hmm. So, so the Americans and the Russians obviously had nuclear powered submarines. Were we the only game in town, or did any other countries have anything remotely close to what we had?
The French had nuclear submarines, and the British had nuclear submarines. In fact, the first British nuclear submarine, I believe, was the Dreadnought, and she was basically had the same S5W plant that that all of our submarines had. And they rapidly, British industry rapidly said, ah, you didn't want to do that. We want to build our own industry. We have our own nuclear power industry. We can do that. And besides, the money goes to our people and our technology. So they started building their own plants. But you know, we were the only guys, and then China eventually got some nuclear powered ships, submarines in the I think late 70s. Maybe they weren't very good. They were pretty terrible.
Did I hear you say? Did I hear you right? You were a weapons officer on the Sea Dragon, or was that?
That was a weapons. Yeah, I spent a year as a damage control assistant in the engineering department, which you had to do according to Rickover. And then I spent 2 years as weapons officer. And I transitioned from the World War II steam torpedoes and the Mark 37 battery operated anti-submarine torpedoes into the heavyweight Mark 48 torpedo, which still in its latest version it's a really great weapon for submarines and surface ships.
So, what are your day-to-day operations on that role? What are you responsible for? Walk us through basically a day-to-day operation.
Well, you shoot lots of exercise torpedoes. We did that. We recognized that one of the things that even though the Soviets had a lot more submarines, but we practiced a lot with the torpedoes. So you'd load up exercise torpedoes without a warhead, and they had they would when they ran out of juice, ran out of power, they would go to the surface and could be retrieved. So you load exercise torpedoes and shoot them at targets, and that was important. We also did a couple of mine operations. We could also shoot mines from the torpedoes. I also was in charge of the deck gang. A few seamen that needed to keep the top side painted and all the equipment that goes up topside when the submarine comes into port, some railings and things, maintain that. And you have to guard the nuclear weapons, and you have to maintain a personal reliability program of people who deal with nuclear weapons and all those associated things.
Mm-hmm. So, after the Sea Dragon, what was your assignment after that?
I went to be chief engineer of the Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine Ulysses S. Grant, or as we called her, Useless Grant. And I did too well on my engineering test. I had to qualify engineer, another 6 months of training, and go to naval reactors and took a test, and I flunked the first one. And I did something stupid with one particular question they asked several times, and I flunked. When they sent me back again, and I passed it, I did such a good job. All they would offer me is to overhaul a nuclear submarine as chief engineer, which is not the easiest job in the world. I say it's probably one of the hardest jobs in the Navy. So we did a patrol, and then took her into the overhaul period. Was in charge of the overhaul of the propulsion plant, all the auxiliary systems. Then we did a demonstration and shakedown cruise afterwards, in which one of the crews, there's two crews on those submarines. One of the crew got to shoot a dummy missile. We got to fire sabots, water slugs from the 16 tubes and ripple fire. That was kind of fun.
And where were you stationed at this point?
Started out in Charleston, did a patrol out there. Then we shifted home port to Newport News, Virginia, and did a 22-month, I forget, overhaul there at the civilian shipyard. And it was kind of interesting because Rickover was having a battle with the president of the shipyard. So I would get involved in some of those rough stuff. And then we shifted home ports to New London, Connecticut, and then the rest of the submarine was going to go to Holyloch and run patrols out of Holyloch, Scotland. I left. I transferred before that happened. I went to the ops officer, operations and net navigator on the Permit, Thresher class submarine.
I'm sorry, the name of that sub?
It was Permit.
And what year would that have been? Approximately.
That would have been 80. Um, Actually, I arrived there in 79, late December of 79. It was only a 2-year tour. Left in 81, late 81. And I was, you only got one shot at shore duty. It was only a 2-year shore duty vice three everybody else gets if you were nuclear trained. And so I asked for Guam. I kind of liked Guam. Guam was warm and it was nice diving. And they said, well, how about London, United Kingdom? And I went, I recognize right answer when told. I will go to London. So we went from San Diego to London, spent 2 years there. And I got to
How'd you like
play in
that?
the Falklands War. I I was direct liaison with the Royal Navy and their submarine force would go over to the Ministry of Defense, at least once a month, and they'd come visit me. And so when President Reagan said, "We're not helping the the uh, uh, the English fight the war in the Falklands," and that means that our admirals couldn't talk to their admirals. And so they said, "Who goes to the Ministry of Defense and knows the Brits, and who's expendable?" Oh, Jim Bryant. He's a junior lieutenant commander. He's expendable. No one knows him. And we all wore civilian clothes anyway. So I would get secret, no farm messages and say, go show these to the Brits. Don't let them copy them. Take notes. They will show you yours. You take notes and ask these questions. And so we'd go to the Ministry of Defense and they say, oh, hi, Jim. Have some sherry. So they unscrew open cap sherry, give me a little glass of sherry. Ask your questions, please. So I asked my questions. And after about 2 glasses of sherry, they got to answer their questions, ask their questions. The Brits are very clever and very friendly.
Mm-hmm. Did you like your time in London?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, and we were able to get basic understanding because they were trying to send ships down to the Falklands. We needed to get our submarines out of the way because any surface ship, if they have a possible sub and it's wartime, how they define that, they should have weapon at it. And if it blows up, it was a submarine. So we need
Yeah,
to separate, our submarines from their ships
I
and
bet.
stay out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you were there for 2 years,
2 years, yes.
and then where are you off to?
Then I went to be executive officer of Haddock, another Thresher class submarine. It was the last Thresher class submarine. And it was scheduled to go into overhaul. They're having such problems with overhauling these Thresher class submarines in Mare Island Naval Shipyard, which is in Vallejo, California, just north of the north part of the bay of San Francisco Bay, that they decided that the commanding officer and executive officer, second command, had to have been served as engineer in overhaul. And so I had done that, as I told you previously. So I was told, you're going to go be executive officer and you're going to go to overhaul. But the captain and I did, I mean, we had, it's been said that we were the best commanding officer, executive officer team in the submarine fleet at that particular time in the Pacific. So we did a good job getting that submarine out of there on reasonable time and crew morale and not having drug problems, severe drug problems and all that kind of stuff.
So you mentioned a Thresher class. What exactly does that mean? What is a Thresher class submarine?
Well, the Thresher class submarine was the true, really modern submarine. We did nuclear power with the Skate class, the Sea Dragon was part of, but they looked just like World War II submarines. They had a flat deck, they had lots of superstructure designed so you could walk on. It wooden uh, wooden decks on top so you grip, all kind of like, well, why are we doing this? Well, we did that because they had deck guns and the guys would go topside and shoot deck guns at Japanese ships, and they wanted wood because it was less slippier than metal. Well, why are we doing this with nuclear submarines without deck guns? Well, that's just because it's very hard to change things. And so then we got a better, faster reactor in the skipjack class. a teardrop shaped hull with much more hydrodynamic. It could go really fast. It could go 29 knots, but it was noisy. There was no sound isolation, and we were still using the passive sonar, the basic and more advanced version that the Type 21 German submarine used in World War II, the circular array, the balcony array. It was called the BQR-2. And so, this is all crazy. And the submarine is so noisy that the sonar can't hear very well because it's noise. All the equipment is hard mounted to the hull, and all the vibrations from pumps goes directly to the hull. So Shazam, let's do pressure class, in which we'll sound mount this stuff. We'll put the heavy machinery all on a big raft. Then we'll put these rubber sound isolators on it, stop that vibration, and we're going to move the torpedo room back from the bow of the submarine, where it's always been, to the center of the ship, and put this huge spherical sonar up there and a long linear array up there so we can really listen for Soviet submarines. And that was very successful. Unfortunately, pressure was not designed very well. They did not appreciate the fact that also it could dive very deep. I will say the test depth of 1,300 feet, and I'm not saying that from me. I'm saying that because great authors like Norman Polomar and Dr. Norman Friedman say that in their books, because I know what the actual test depth is, and I can't confirm or deny it. So, but it almost doubled the test depth from 700 feet, which is unclassified of other post-World War II submarines, to 1,300 feet. They didn't appreciate the inherent dangers. They didn't design the systems to dive that deep. They all they did was take the legacy systems, which most of them were diesel boat design, and increase the wall thickness on the seawater systems, make them stronger, and put them. And so that was a lot of problems. And we lost Thresher on 10 April 1963 on a routine deep dive test. And a lot of factors involved, but basically we didn't design the submarine right, and we didn't have the right procedures, and we didn't do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. So at some point, you finish your tour as the XO. At some point, but you become a commander of a ship, correct?
Yes.
And what ship was that?
I commanded Guardfish, SSN 612. She was commissioned in '66. She was stuck when Thresher went down. They decided we need to redesign all these systems that are pressure to seawater, all these systems that are critical systems, hydraulics, high pressure air. And so even though she was laid down, several years before, they stopped. They redesigned the systems, and they put the subsafe systems in Guardfish to make it much more reliable.
So tell us a little bit about the Guardfish. What is the crew capacity on that sub?
I carried I had assigned about 120 people, and that meant that people coming and going. I carried with me to sea, about 110, and there are people always on leave at schools, being transferred, medical issues, that kind of stuff. And I had about 12, 13 officers.
And where were you stationed at this point?
San Diego.
San Diego.
I got when I was offered the job on permit as ops navigator, I told my father, San Diego, it was in San Diego, it's too expensive. And he says, well, son, come to San Diego, we'll take care of you, because all the family was there.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up buying, the family got together in the summer of '80 and bought me a little one-bedroom rancher with 2 little tiny rooms on it on Point Loma in San Diego, which I'm sitting in now.
Oh, cool.
And that encouraged me to stay in San Diego near the family, and everybody liked that. And so when I was XO of Haddock, besides my time in the overhaul, I was here, and Guardfish was home ported here also.
And when did you take command of the Guardfish?
In November of '87, and was relieved in November of '90. I did
Okay, and
6 months deployments to the Western Pacific.
you were you've been what, a 06?
Oh, 05.
Oh five.
Submarine is 05 command.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I cut you off. You said you did 6-month deployments where?
Two 6 month deployments to the Western Pacific.
Okay. And
We
what
call
what
them
what type
Westpac.
what type of missions were those? Were they similar to the ones you've been on in the past?
Similar, but uh, only one special operation per deployment. Spent a lot of time exercising with the Seventh Fleet out there and doing ASW exercises. On the last one, I went to Buckner Bay in Okinawa. They had shore power there, pier, and a nice officers club. And we spent a week, 2 weeks taking out SEALs and Marine long range recon. But back then it was 3-3. It was Third Battalion, Third Marines recon people, and we would take them out and with the rubber boats. We surface, put the rubber boat on the back of the submarine, two of them, fill them with air from the submarine, put their stuff in it, push them off and motor off, and then come back and deflate their boats and put all their gear away.
Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting. And with all the people on board, the Marines were nice. They put a big tent on the beach out there, and so we leave crew in, so it'd make room for the Marines and SEALs to sleep in bunks rather than on the torpedo room floor. And they got kind of a vacation, and the Marines fed them, and they got beach time and beer and all those kind of fun things. And then we come back in every couple of days and change out.
Did you enjoy that assignment?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I got to deal several times with the SEALs. They were very difficult in the 80s. They said we really need to do this dry deck launch stuff. I said, well, it's a bit rough up there. So we surfaced. What the SEAL team lieutenant who was in charge of the team, we looked out, it says, well, you guys can do it. You want to go do it, you do it. I am officer of tactical command of a fleet tug. They've got semi-rigids on there. We'll just deploy those semi-rigids in a lifeguard line behind you, and you guys go have a ball. Well, sure enough, they got all their good stuff on those two rubber boats. Big wave came over, knocked all their stuff and rubber boats in the water, and said, okay, well, I told you, and called the semi-rigid boats to come in and rescue the SEALs.
So that was from 87 to 90. Now that was that toward the end of your when did you retire? You retired in
Well, the
94,
Navy
right?
really messed up and made me captain. I can't believe they did that. And they sent me to a political military billet. When I was in London, I punched my political military ticket because I dealt with Air Force. I dealt with a lot of people in my position in the Royal Navy, and so they had a political military billet on the political military division of the Navy staff, and so I think that's why I got captain. I went back and did that for 3 years
And I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. That was where?
on the Navy staff in the Pentagon.
Pentagon. And did not enjoy that, or did you enjoy that?
I enjoyed it, but they downsized my billet and they did some stuff because I used to have a secretary and a lieutenant commander working for me, and by the end I was working for the Navy captain that commanded the command center because one of my jobs was Inc. C, prevention, the 1972 agreement between the U.S. and the Soviet Union on prevention of incidents at sea. And that, of course, had gone away. We didn't have the Soviets weren't pointing guns at us. We weren't pointing guns at them, doing those acts. So, but it was fun. I worked for a Captain Lou Boink, who was a SEAL, and he'd been a SEAL for 9 years in the Pentagon because he was very, let's say, he knew he'd been in knife and fork school, and he didn't beat people up in the hallway, and all those kind of things. So he was appreciated.
So, over your lengthy career, what do you think your favorite assignment was?
Well, it had to have been London, London ashore, and then command, obviously, command of permit.
Were,
I'm sorry, command of guardfish.
were you able to bring your family to London?
Yes, yeah, we there was no housing, so we rented a house out near Wembley. People have heard of Wembley. That's where the soccer matches are held.
Gotcha.
Right on a tube line. It was convenient. My son went to school there, started their preschool there, and that was good. And working with the Brits was very interesting.
Mhm. So, when you think about your long military career, are there any specific incidents that stand out in your mind?
Incidents I'm willing to admit.
Yeah, yeah, that's the trick, isn't it?
Well, well, there was in the Indian Ocean as navigator in the summer of '80. Uh, we did some important stuff. Let's just say that. Uh, the Soviets were watching our battle group in the Northern Arabian Sea, and we were there keeping track of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure the battle group commander was very happy that he had a nuclear submarine out to the south of him who was watching things.
Yeah. So, you are now and have been involved with doing some type of research on the incident of the Thresher. So tell us a little bit about your involvement with that.
Well, I became friends back in the early 2000s with a guy named Bruce Rule. And Bruce Rule was the acoustic expert who analyzed the acoustic recordings on papergram recordings of Thresher's last dive. And he presented that he was the SOSUS for the sound surveillance system. It was 40 hydrophones were laid out at the right depth along our coastlines around certain islands that could pick up the Soviet submarine acoustic propellers and stuff. And when Thresher sank, she was about 30 to 50 nautical miles from Array Fox, a 40 hydrophone array off the Gulf of Maine there. And Bruce Rule analyzed this, and his analysis led the Naval Court of Inquiry, admirals and senior captains assigned there to figure out what happened and how to prevent it happening again. And he decided in about the 2016 timeframe that the Navy hadn't declassified that he was going to write a book and tell what happened, what his analysis of. So he wrote a book called Why the Thresher Was Lost and published in 2018. And technically, it was a secret book because it was, all that information was secret. And so I started to think, well, let me go study Thresher. And I started submitting Freedom of Information Act requests. And the Navy has very, very clever, good bureaucrats. They're able to foil Freedom of Information Act requests. Remember, Thresher, this data was 50 years old as of 2013. So I finally said, well, this is silly. We asked for stuff that we knew was unclassified, and with a sleight of hand magic, that request would somehow get pigeonholed somewhere or go somewhere. So I'm going to sue them. So I found a good attorney, and in July of 2019, filed a lawsuit against the Navy, and got assigned a judge in D.C. And the Navy kept saying things every month. Well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and whatever. Didn't do anything. So finally, the judge, let's have a hearing in February of 2020. And he says, okay, normally I side with the government, but in this case, produce at least 300 pages a month of redacted material on Thresher. And therefore, we only had finally the pandemic held things up. But until September of 2020, when they made their first release, there were only 19 pages of testimony from the Port of Inquiry on Thresher released, and that was redacted, heavily redacted. And now we have over 4,000 pages, thanks to that lawsuit.
What's your sense of why the Navy was hesitant to release it?
The Navy traditionally does not want to release stuff. When Admiral Ernest King, who was head of the Navy in World War II, was asked, "What do we tell the public?" We will tell the public when we sail into Tokyo Bay and get their surrender. We will tell them we won. And of course, you can't do that. They did something. They did at Tarawa. I think that they finally showed pictures of dead bodies in the water, but the Navy just is reluctant to release information.
And was there a smoking gun that you were able to find, or it was...
No smoking guns. The only thing that is strange is the information, the papergram that Bruce Rule used to brief the Court of Inquiry on the last minute that shows main ballast tank blow, that shows main coolant pumps stopping, possibly some fluctuation in main coolant pump frequency. When that exhibit 52, was released, it wasn't the right exhibit. It didn't show the information on Thresher. It was from, there was a substitute paper, a gram, it was about 70 degrees in the wrong direction. So it was looking out to sea. And what you see on it is random merchant ships going by and noise. Because Thresher was much to the almost southwest of that array.
How many people were lost in that incident?
129 people were lost. It's in the number of people lost, it still remains the world's worst nuclear submarine disaster because it had a lot of shipyard workers on it. I think the Kursk had 118 on board, which was the second one. The worst submarine disaster is the Surkov, a French submarine that avoided getting captured by the Germans in World War II and got run over by a merchant ship in the Caribbean while it was trying to head out to Tahiti. But it was like 131. But it was the first, the worst, and generated that, gee, we're not doing things right, so we got to create this program called SubSafe. And SubSafe has prevented a loss of a nuclear submarine since then, a SubSafe submarine. We lost Scorpion in '68, but that was highly likely was a battery explosion and not anything to do with submarine safety of the systems.
Mm-hmm. So the Thresher, I assume they located that? Is it still underwater? What are they doing?
Oh yeah. We cover things in nuclear. So there's a reactor down there. In Scorpion, there's 2 nuclear weapons. I was action officer on the Navy staff that released the fact that Scorpion carried 2 Aster torpedoes, nuclear tip torpedoes. And when you have plutonium, you want to let it stay on the bottom. You don't try to get it because it rusts quickly. It decays and it sticks with the mud, and you start trying to pick things up. And you got a reactor, and you have nuclear weapons. And of course, there are no weapons on Thresher, but there was a reactor.
Yeah, which can be nasty in and of itself. Just leave
it. They had to bring Trieste out from the West Coast, and the summer of '63 they found the anchor, and the weather got bad. The weather off New England gets bad quickly, if you get towards the fall. It doesn't get better till you get toward the end of spring. So they didn't find the hull until the next year.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still 7 pieces?
Are you still involved with doing research into that?
Okay. Yes.
Are you going to be writing a book? I know you have some publications in other magazines and such, correct?
I just got a publication in the American Submariner magazine on a procedure that was not authorized. It could have saved Thresher. Yes, we're working on a book proposal now.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, let me know when it comes out. I'd like to take a look at it.
Okay.
All right. So, if you're wearing it's hard for me to see from here, but you're wearing a Navy, is that Navy ball cap. Let's say let's say you're walking around. There you go. Let's say you're
Well,
walking around San Diego and some young man or woman comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about enlisting or becoming a commissioned officer in the Navy." What advice would you give to them on how to be successful in the U.S. military?
well, it depends on your level of education and what your dedication is. I was a Naval Academy Blue and Gold officer for 19 years. I interviewed candidates. And one of the first things I would say to them is look around, you know, look at all the services and see what would get you. And read some books on it. And I would tell them, apply for West Point. West Point's easier to get into than the Naval Academy. Apply for all the service academies. See all the recruiters, and recruiter is going to tell you stories. We hear a lot about recruiters lying. Well, that's just their marketing. So you need to talk to and read some books and see what you like. Nuclear power training is very difficult, but it leaves you open to doing a lot of good things in your life if you don't stay with the Navy or you stay in and retire. I'm Facebook friends on a number of different submarine sites. Cold War Warriors, 594 Tough, Always a Submariner, a number of these sites. And these guys are continuously posting. I went to college, I screwed up, I partied, I didn't study. Parents said no more, no more support for you. They applied to the Navy. They put in the nuclear power program. They learned how to study. They learned how to concentrate and focus. They learned skills. They got out, and they're always saying, "Yeah, I hope I have my own business, or I've been working for this big company, and I'm retiring." And I attribute it all to the Navy getting me squared away. And I had a lot of that. I saw a lot of that. A lot of kids. I tried, you want to stay in? You're going well in the Navy. And he said, "Look, I screwed up when I was a young guy in college, got kicked out. I'm fixed now. I know how to study. I know how to do this stuff, and I'm going to do good." And I get, I see them on Facebook saying, the Navy really helped me do this.
So obviously we're recording right now. We're going to send you a copy of this video in probably about 3 months. And you'll also be given instructions on how to submit this story to the Library of Congress Veterans History Project up in Washington, D.C., where it should be retained theoretically for hundreds of years. Several decades from now, one of your great grandkids might stumble upon this video. What would you want them to know about your service to your country?
Well, it was hard, and that came to a point in the summer of '86. I've been selected to go command of a submarine, selected to go command an attack submarine, and the last week in July, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. And the Navy approached me. He says, you're the family business. I have a sister, but she has cerebral palsy, and she couldn't take over the business. And he says, if you want to take over your family business as you're the last surviving person that can do that, we'll move you to a reserve unit in the next couple of weeks, and you can do that, and then we'll phase you out, and you can take over your father's business. And I said, well, that's very nice of the Navy. I appreciated that, but I've been this far, and I got to go do it. So I turned that down.
So
And
how many years
and that
total?
was one of the largest Honda dealerships in Southern California at the time.
Mm-hmm. So how many years total were you in the Navy?
23, and if you count 4 at the Naval Academy, that'd be 27.
Gotcha.
But
Is there
that's not kind of retirement.
anything else you wanted to document?
No, I don't think so.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. I personally, I learned a lot about submarines just from speaking with you over the last hour. More importantly, though, thank you for your service to our country. I appreciate it.
It was truly an honor and a privilege to be able to do that.